My name is Chloe, and this is the story of how my life turned upside down, not once, but twice. I guess I should start at the beginning. I was born to loving parents, Mark and Lisa Smith, in a small suburban town. Dad was a journalist, and Mom worked as a nurse. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Life was pretty normal until I turned 12. That's when everything changed. It was a rainy Tuesday evening, and my parents were driving home from a dinner party. I was at home with my grandma, watching some silly cartoon when the phone rang. I'll never forget the chill that ran down my spine when I heard my grandma's muffled sobs from the kitchen. The next few days were a blur. Mom died on impact, they told us. Dad survived, but barely. When I finally got to see him in the hospital, he was a shell of the man I knew. His legs were crushed, and the doctors said he'd never walk again. "Chloe," he croaked, reaching for my hand. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'm so sorry." I didn't understand why he was apologizing. It wasn't his fault some drunk driver had plowed into their car. But as I grew older, I realized he was sorry for what our lives had become, for the struggles we'd face, for the mother I'd lost, for the father he thought he could no longer be. But my dad, Mark Smith, was made of stronger stuff than he gave himself credit for. Once he was out of the hospital and settled into his wheelchair, he threw himself into his work. He'd always been a talented writer, and now he channeled all his energy into his job as an editor at the city's major newspaper. As I entered my teens, Dad made sure I had everything I needed. He encouraged me to join clubs, to make friends, to have as normal a life as possible. But the truth was, I preferred spending time with him. We'd watch old movies together, argue about books, and he'd help me with my homework. When it came time for college, Dad insisted I go away to school. "You need to spread your wings, kiddo," he said. "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." I was hesitant, but I knew he was right. So off I went to State University, majoring in accounting. It was there that I met Jessica, who would become my best friend. And through Jessica, I met her second cousin, Michael. Michael was kind, funny, and he didn't bat an eye when I told him about my dad. In fact, the first time he met Dad, they hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared love of classic rock. "Your old man's cool," Michael told me later. "And you're pretty amazing for taking care of him all these years." I shrugged it off, but inside, I was glowing. For the first time since the accident, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could have a normal life. A life with love, laughter, and yes, even a family of my own someday. After graduation, life seemed to fall into place like pieces of a puzzle. I landed a job at the local tax service, and Michael started working as a long-haul truck driver. We dated for 2 years before he popped the question on a crisp autumn evening in the park where we had our first date. I was over the moon, but there was one thing I needed to make clear. "Yes, Michael. But I can't leave my dad. He needs me." Michael's face broke into a wide grin. "I wouldn't have it any other way. We'll all live together. Your dad's apartment is big enough for the 3 of us, right?" The wedding was small but beautiful. Dad insisted on wheeling himself down the aisle to give me away. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. As I stood there, hand in hand with Michael, I felt like I was living a fairy tale. But every fairy tale has its villains, and mine came in the form of my mother-in-law, Karen, and sister-in-law, Emily. From the moment I met them, I could tell they didn't approve of me. "So, your father is handicapped?" Karen had asked during our first meeting, her nose wrinkling as if she'd smelled something unpleasant. "He's disabled," I corrected, trying to keep my tone neutral. "But he works as an editor, Anne." "How nice," she interrupted, clearly uninterested. "Michael, darling, are you sure about this? There are so many nice girls from good families." I felt my face burn with anger and shame. Michael, bless him, immediately jumped to my defense. "Mom, Chloe is from a good family. Her dad's disability doesn't change that. I love her, and that's all that matters." That shut Karen up, but I could see the disapproval lingering in her eyes. Emily, taking cues from her mother, was equally cold towards me. After the wedding, true to his word, Michael moved in with Dad and me. Our life fell into a comfortable routine. I'd go to work at the tax office, Michael would be on the road for days at a time, and when he was home, we'd all have dinner together. But whenever Karen and Emily visited, the atmosphere in our home changed. They'd strut around like they owned the place, barely acknowledging Dad's presence. Once, I overheard Karen muttering to Emily, "It's a shame. Michael could have done so much better. Now he's stuck with this girl and her crippled father. What if they have children? Can you imagine the genes?" I was furious, but I bit my tongue. For Michael's sake, I tried to keep the peace. But it was getting harder and harder. One evening, after a particularly tense visit from Karen and Emily, I broke down in tears. Michael found me in our bedroom, sobbing. Hey, he said, pulling me into his arms. "What's wrong?" "Your mom and sister," I hiccuped. "They hate me. They think I'm not good enough for you because of Dad." Michael's face hardened. "That's ridiculous. You and your dad are my family now. If they can't accept that, it's their problem, not ours." His words comforted me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of our troubles with Karen and Emily. As the months passed, Michael's trucking business began to flourish. He was always on the road, crisscrossing the country in his big rig. I missed him terribly when he was gone, but I threw myself into my work at the tax office and spent my evenings keeping Dad company. One crisp autumn evening, as I was helping Dad into bed, Michael called. His voice crackled with excitement over the phone. "Chloe, I've been thinking," he said. "How would you feel about buying a townhouse? It would be easier for your dad to move around in a wheelchair. He could spend more time outside. Plus, you could have a garden. Something to keep you busy when I'm on the road." The more he talked, the more I warmed to the idea. I glanced at Dad, who was pretending not to eavesdrop. "What do you think, Dad?" I asked, putting the phone on speaker. Dad's eyes lit up. "A garden would be nice," he admitted. "And it would be easier to get outside." That settled it. Over the next few weeks, we threw ourselves into house hunting. We finally found the perfect place, a spacious townhouse with wide doorways, a roll-in shower for Dad, and a beautiful backyard. Taking out a mortgage was scary, but with Michael's income and mine, plus the rent from Dad's old apartment, we managed to make it work. We moved in on a sunny Saturday in spring, and I'll never forget the look on Dad's face as he wheeled himself out onto our new patio. "This is perfect, sweetie," he said, his eyes misty. "Thank you." We spent the next few months settling in, making the place our own. I planted a small vegetable garden, and Dad would sit outside for hours, soaking up the sun and fresh air. It was idyllic. Then came the housewarming party. We invited friends, colleagues, and yes, Karen and Emily. The party was in full swing when they arrived, fashionably late as usual. They sauntered in, eyeing everything with barely concealed envy. As we moved through the house, I could see the wheels turning in Karen's head. When we reached the master bedroom, she turned to me with a sly smile. "You know, Chloe," she said, her voice low. "This would be perfect for Michael and me. Why don't you send your father to a nursing home? Then I could move in here." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" "Oh, don't look so shocked," Karen continued. "Your father isn't, well, he's not a whole person anymore, is he? He doesn't need all this luxury. A nursing home would be more than enough for someone in his condition." Before I could respond, Karen marched out to the patio, where Dad was chatting with some guests. To my horror, she grabbed the handles of his wheelchair and started pushing him towards the driveway. "Karen!" I shouted, running after her. "What are you doing?" "If he won't go to a nursing home, he can stay outside," she sneered. "That's what you wanted, isn't it? For him to be outdoors?" I was shaking with rage and disbelief. Thankfully, Michael had heard the commotion and came running. His face turned red with anger when he saw what his mother was doing. "Mom," he bellowed. What the hell are you doing? Let go of Mark's chair right now. Karen looked shocked at Michael's tone. But honey, I was just. I don't want to hear it, Michael cut her off. You and Emily need to leave. Now. After they left, Michael apologized profusely to Dad and me. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I had no idea she would. I'm just so sorry. Dad reached out and patted Michael's hand. It's not your fault, son. Some people, they just can't understand. Life settled into a new rhythm after the housewarming incident. Karen and Emily kept their distance, which suited me just fine. Michael threw himself into his work, taking on more long-haul routes to help cover our new mortgage. I split my time between my job at the tax office and tending to our home and Dad. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. Our life fell into a comfortable routine. Michael was on the road more often than not, but when he was home, our little family was happy. Dad's health was stable, and he seemed content spending his days in the garden or working on his editing from home. Then came the call that shattered my world. I was at work when my phone rang. An unfamiliar male voice greeted me. Mrs. Thompson? This is Officer Rodriguez from the Highway Patrol. My heart dropped into my stomach. Yes? I managed to squeak out. I'm sorry to inform you that your husband, Michael Thompson, has been in a serious accident. The rest of the conversation was a blur. Words like head-on collision and didn't make it floated around me, but I couldn't process them. It wasn't until I heard myself thanking the officer and hanging up that reality began to sink in. Michael was gone. The next week was a haze of grief and disbelief. I moved through the motions of planning the funeral like a robot, barely able to comprehend what was happening. The day before the funeral, I steeled myself and called Karen. I thought she deserved to hear about her son's death from me, not from some impersonal newspaper obituary. Hello? Karen's sharp voice answered. Karen, it's Chloe, I said, my voice trembling. It's about Michael. He's gone. There was an accident. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, to my shock, Karen's voice came back, dripping with venom. This is your fault, she hissed. You forced him to work so hard, driving that truck to pay for your fancy house. You killed my son. I was stunned. Karen, that's not. Save it, she snapped. I expect you to give him the best funeral money can buy. But don't expect a penny from us. You made your bed, now lie in it. The line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, tears streaming down my face. How could she be so cruel? How could she blame me for this? The day of Michael's funeral dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. The church was packed. Michael had been well liked in the community, and it seemed like half the town had turned out to pay their respects. After the service, as people filed past to offer their condolences, I was struck by the absence of Michael's mother and sister. They hadn't even bothered to show up to their own son and brother's funeral. Dad reached out and squeezed my hand. Their loss, sweetie. We're family, and we'll get through this together. As we pulled into our driveway, something seemed off. The lights were on in the house, which was strange, because I was sure I'd turned everything off before we left. Did you leave any lights on, Dad? I asked, frowning. He shook his head. No, I don't think so. As we got closer, I could see movement inside the house. My heart started racing. Were we being robbed? On the day of Michael's funeral, no less? I helped Dad out of the car and into his wheelchair, my mind racing. Should I call the police? But as we approached the front door, I heard familiar voices inside. My blood ran cold as I recognized them. I pushed open the door to find Karen and Emily in our living room, surrounded by boxes and pieces of furniture. What the hell is going on here? I demanded, my grief momentarily forgotten in the face of this outrageous intrusion. Karen turned to me, her face a mask of false sympathy. Oh, Chloe, dear. We're just helping you pack up. After all, you can't possibly afford to keep this place now that Michael's gone. I was speechless. Emily chimed in, her voice sickeningly sweet. Don't worry, you can go back to your father's apartment. It's cozy. I could feel the rage building inside me. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Get out of my house right now. Karen had the audacity to look offended. This house belongs to us now. All of Michael's property does. We're his real family, after all. Like hell you are, I exploded. Where were you today? At his funeral? Oh, that's right, you couldn't be bothered to show up. Karen waved her hand dismissively. We were busy making arrangements. Now, be a good girl and start packing. We'll need you out by tomorrow. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These women hadn't shed a tear for Michael, hadn't even attended his funeral, and now they were trying to kick us out of our home? I'm calling the police, I said, pulling out my phone. Karen and Emily exchanged worried glances. They clearly hadn't expected me to fight back. Now, Chloe, Karen began, but I cut her off. No. You have exactly 5 minutes to get out of my house before I call the cops. This is my home. Michael and I bought it together. You have no right to be here. Maybe it was the steel in my voice, or the fire in my eyes, but Karen and Emily finally seemed to realize they'd gone too far. They gathered their things and left, but not before Karen turned to me with a sneer. This isn't over, Chloe. You'll be hearing from our lawyers. The days following Michael's funeral were a blur of grief, anxiety, and paperwork. I threw myself into sorting out Michael's affairs, partly to keep busy and partly out of fear that Karen and Emily would try to swoop in and take what wasn't theirs. A week after the funeral, I received a call from a local law firm. My heart raced as I answered, fearing it was Karen making good on her threat of legal action. Mrs. Thompson, a crisp, professional voice asked. This is James Anderson from Anderson and Partners. I'm calling regarding your late husband's will. I felt a glimmer of hope. His will? I didn't know he had one. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Thompson came to see us about 6 months ago. He asked that we contact you in the event of his passing. I scheduled an appointment for the next day, my mind reeling. Why hadn't Michael told me about this? What did it mean? The next morning, I wheeled Dad into Mr. Anderson's office. The lawyer greeted us warmly, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Smith, thank you for coming in, he said, gesturing for us to settle near his desk. I'm sorry for your loss. Mr. Anderson opened a file on his desk. Now, as I mentioned on the phone, your husband came to see us to draft his will. He was very clear about his wishes. I held my breath as Mr. Anderson began to read. I, Michael Thompson, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath all my worldly possessions to my beloved wife, Chloe Thompson. I gasped. Dad's grip on my hand tightened. Mr. Anderson continued, this includes our home, my truck, and all our savings. It is my wish that Chloe use these resources to care for herself and her father, Mark Smith, whom I have come to love as my own. Tears were streaming down my face now. Even from beyond the grave, Michael was taking care of us. There's more, Mr. Anderson said gently. Mr. Thompson left a letter for you. He handed me an envelope. With shaking hands, I opened it and began to read. My dearest Chloe. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm so sorry for leaving you and Mark. Please know that you two were the best thing that ever happened to me. I made this will because I know how my mother and sister can be. I didn't want to worry you, but I needed to make sure you and Mark were protected if anything happened to me. You're my real family, Chloe. You and Mark. Not them. Take care of each other. Live your lives to the fullest. And know that I'll always be watching over you. All my love, Michael. I clutched the letter to my chest, sobbing. Dad was crying too, his weathered hand patting my arm. Mr. Anderson gave us a moment before speaking again. Mrs. Thompson, there's one more thing. Your husband's truck was insured. Given the circumstances of the accident, the insurance company will be paying out the full value of the policy. I looked up, sniffling. What does that mean? It means, Mr. Anderson said with a small smile, that you'll be receiving a substantial sum. Enough to pay off your mortgage and then some. As we left the lawyer's office, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. We were going to be okay. Michael had made sure of it. As we pulled into our driveway, I noticed a familiar car parked on the street. My heart sank as I recognized Karen's sleek sedan. Oh no, I muttered. What now? Sure enough, Karen and Emily were waiting on our front porch. But this time I wasn't afraid. I had Michael's letter in my pocket and the strength of his love in my heart. Chloe, Karen began as we approached, her voice sickly sweet. We need to talk about Michael's estate. I stood tall, looking her straight in the eye. No, Karen. We don't. Michael left everything to me. It's all legal and official. And do you want to know why? Because we were his real family. Not you. Now, please leave. You're trespassing on my property. For once, Karen was speechless. Emily tugged at her arm, whispering urgently. With one last venomous glare, they got in their car and drove away. The weeks following our meeting with the lawyer were a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into settling Michael's affairs, grateful for the distraction from my grief. The insurance payout came through, and true to Mr. Anderson's word, it was enough to pay off our mortgage, with plenty left over. One afternoon, as I was going through Michael's desk, I came across a small notebook. Curious, I opened it and found pages filled with his messy scrawl. It was a journal of sorts, filled with his thoughts and plans for our future. Thinking about starting a college fund for our future kids, one entry read. Want to make sure they have the best start in life. My heart clenched. We had talked about having children someday, but had decided to wait until we were more financially stable. Now, reading Michael's private hopes and dreams, I felt a fresh wave of grief wash over me. Oh, Michael, I whispered, clutching the notebook to my chest. We had so many plans. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. My mind kept drifting to the journal, to the future we'd never have. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Michael. He was smiling, holding out his hand to me. It's okay, Chloe, he said in my dream. Everything's going to be all right. I woke up the next morning feeling different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something had changed. As I got ready for work, a wave of nausea hit me. I barely made it to the bathroom in time. But as the days went by, the morning sickness persisted. At first, I chalked it up to stress and grief. But a small voice in the back of my mind whispered another possibility. Finally, after a week of this, I found myself standing in the pharmacy aisle, staring at pregnancy tests. With trembling hands, I bought one and hurried home. The 3 minutes I waited for the result were the longest of my life. When I finally looked at the test, I saw 2 clear blue lines. I sank to the bathroom floor, a mix of emotions overwhelming me. Joy, fear, grief, hope, they all swirled together in a dizzying cocktail. Chloe? Dad's voice came through the door. Everything okay in there? I opened the door, tears streaming down my face. Dad's expression immediately changed from concern to alarm. What's wrong, sweetie? He asked. I held up the test, my hand shaking. I'm pregnant, Dad. I fell into his arms, sobbing. He held me, stroking my hair like he used to when I was a little girl. It's okay, he murmured. It's going to be okay. You're not alone, Chloe. And this baby is a gift. A piece of Michael that will live on. His words struck a chord in me. This baby was a part of Michael, a continuation of our love. Suddenly, the fear began to recede, replaced by a fierce determination. You're right, I said, wiping my eyes. This baby is a gift. And we're going to be okay. Dad smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. That's my girl. Now, let's get you something to eat. You're eating for two now, after all. As we made our way to the kitchen, I felt a sense of hope blooming in my chest. Yes, the road ahead would be challenging. But with my father by my side and Michael's child growing inside me, I knew we could face anything. As my belly grew with our child, I found strength I never knew I had. Dad was my rock, always there with a kind word or a helping hand. We settled into a new routine, just the two of us, eagerly anticipating the arrival of the newest member of our little family. One sunny afternoon, as I was tending to the garden Dad and I had planted together, I heard a car pull up. My heart sank as I recognized Karen's sedan. What could they possibly want now? I made my way to the front of the house, one hand instinctively cradling my swollen belly. Karen and Emily stood on our porch, looking uncomfortable and slightly desperate. "Chloe," Karen began, her voice lacking its usual sharpness. We need to talk to you." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. Emily chimed in, her eyes darting around nervously. "We've hit some hard times. We were wondering if we could stay in your father's old apartment. Just until we get back on our feet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything they'd put us through, they had the audacity to ask for more? "I'm sorry," I said, my voice firm but calm. "That's not possible. I don't want to communicate with you anymore." Karen's eyes narrowed as they fell on my pregnant belly. Her face contorted with a mix of shock and disgust. You're pregnant?" she spat. "Already? You little prostitute. I can't believe you've already found a new man. Michael's body isn't even cold in the ground." I felt a surge of anger, but I pushed it down. I didn't make excuses and say that it was Michael's child. I didn't want my baby to have such a grandmother and aunt. Instead, I smiled, a small, secretive smile that seemed to unnerve Karen even more. "My personal life is none of your concern," I said calmly. "Now, I think it's time for you to leave." Karen looked like she wanted to say more, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She turned on her heel, grabbing Emily's arm. I watched as they drove away, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. I had stood my ground, protected my family, and maintained my dignity. Michael would have been proud.
Panic gripped my heart as I stared at the unknown number flashing on my phone screen. It was an early morning in April, a time when calls usually meant trouble. I answered with a hesitant, "Hello? Lara Mitchell?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, urgent. "Yes, speaking." "This is St. Mary's Hospital. Your husband, Ethan Mitchell, was brought in early this morning. He's been in a traffic accident." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Ethan, my husband of 6 years, the man who promised to grow old with me, now lying in a hospital bed. My mind raced with questions, but my voice was a mere whisper. Is he okay?" "He's stable, but we need you here, Mrs. Mitchell. Can you come?" "I'll be there as soon as I can." I hung up, my hands trembling. Ethan had been on a business trip or so, he said. Why was he in a hospital here, in our city? I rushed to the hospital, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The cold morning air stung my face as I ran, but it was nothing compared to the turmoil inside me. Arriving at the hospital, I was led to Ethan's room. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached, preparing myself to see him, to be strong for him. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. The door to Ethan's room was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, expecting to find Ethan alone, injured, vulnerable. Instead, I found him and Mia, his sister, in a state of undress, their bodies entangled in a way that siblings should never be. A wave of nausea hit me. Mia, who had always been cold and distant towards me, was now in the arms of my husband. Their betrayal was a visceral blow. "Ethan?" My voice broke the silence, thick with disbelief and disgust. Mia turned, her eyes wide with shock. Ethan followed, his face a mask of guilt. "Lara, this isn't what it looks like," Ethan stammered, but his words were empty, meaningless. I couldn't listen anymore. I fled the room. Each step away from them felt like a step out of a nightmare. But this was no dream. It was a harsh, cruel reality. In the empty corridor, my thoughts raced. Ethan and Mia together? It was unthinkable, yet the evidence was undeniable. My marriage, my trust, my entire world had been shattered in an instant. And as the initial shock subsided, a fiery anger took its place. They had betrayed me, humiliated me, but I wouldn't let them get away with it. I would make them pay for their deceit. With a newfound resolve, I walked away from the room, away from the life I thought I knew. I was no longer the naive, trusting wife. I was a woman scorned, and I would have my revenge. The evening sun cast long shadows across my living room, but the darkness creeping into my heart was far deeper. Alone, with my thoughts spiraling, I reflected on the past, trying to understand how my life had come to this. Ethan and I met at a mutual friend's party, a chance encounter that blossomed into love. He was charming, attentive, and I thought honest. Our wedding was a dream, filled with promises of a future together. But Mia, she was always a thorn in our relationship. Ethan's older sister by 3 years, she wielded a peculiar hold over him, one that I never quite understood. Her disdain for me was evident from the start. At our wedding, her forced smile didn't reach her eyes, which were cold, calculating. "I'll always be his first love, you know," Mia once whispered to me, a statement that I had dismissed as sibling affection. How wrong I was. As I sat there lost in thought, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. I answered, my voice cold, distant. "Lara, please let me explain," Ethan pleaded. "Explain? How do you explain betrayal, Ethan, with your own sister?" The words tasted bitter in my mouth. "It's not what you think, Lara. It's complicated." "Complicated? You're right. Betraying your wife with your sister is complicated, disgusting even." Ethan was silent for a moment. "Mia and we've always been close. Too close, maybe. But I love you, Lara." "Love? Your love is a lie, Ethan. You've made a mockery of our vows." I could hear the desperation in his voice. "Lara, please. We can fix this. There's nothing left to fix. You've broken everything." With that, I hung up. Tears threatened to fall, but I willed them away. I wouldn't cry for Ethan, not anymore. He didn't deserve my tears. I thought about our life together, the lies woven into the fabric of our marriage. The late nights Ethan claimed were for work, the secretive phone calls, the sudden trips. It all made sense now. Mia's provocations, her sly comments, her outright hostility, it wasn't just jealousy, it was guilt, masked as hatred. And I had been too blind to see it. But no more. I would not be the victim in this sordid tale. They would pay for their betrayal. I would see to that. The night grew darker, mirroring the resolve settling in my heart. Ethan and Mia had wronged me, but they wouldn't have the last laugh. I would have my revenge, and it would be as cold and merciless as their betrayal. The next morning, the world outside was oblivious to the storm raging in my heart. I decided to step out for some air, to clear my head, but fate had other plans. Walking through the park, lost in thought, I bumped into someone. It was Paul, Mia's husband. Our encounters were always brief, limited to polite exchanges at family gatherings. "Lara, right?" Paul's voice was warm, a stark contrast to the chill in my heart. "Yes, hi, Paul. Fancy meeting you here," I replied, forcing a smile. He noticed my discomfort. "Everything okay? You seem preoccupied." I hesitated, but decided against sharing my turmoil. "Just one of those days, you know?" Paul nodded understandingly. "I get it, if you ever need to talk." His offer was kind, but the irony wasn't lost on me. Here was Mia's husband, offering a shoulder to the wife she had betrayed. We parted ways soon after, a brief encounter that should have been insignificant. Yet, it was anything but. That evening, my phone rang. It was Mia. Her voice was a venomous hiss. "So, you're sinking your claws into my husband now? You're despicable, Lara." I was taken aback. "What are you talking about, Mia?" "Don't play dumb. Paul told me he saw you today, plotting to steal him too, huh?" Her accusations were ludicrous. "Mia, you're delusional. It was a chance meeting, nothing more." "Chance meeting? Right? Just like how you chanced upon Ethan?" Her words stung, but I kept my composure. "Mia, your paranoia is showing. Unlike some people, I respect the sanctity of marriage." There was a pause, then Mia spat. "You'll pay for this, Lara. Mark my words." The call ended, leaving me in stunned silence. Mia's delusions knew no bounds. First, she betrayed me with Ethan, and now she accused me of trying to seduce her husband. The irony was almost laughable. But her threats were not. Mia had shown her true colors, and they were as ugly as her soul. I realized then that my revenge couldn't be just about Ethan. Mia, too, deserved to face the consequences of her actions. Her betrayal was a double-edged sword, and I would ensure it cut her just as deeply as it had cut me. My resolve hardened. Ethan and Mia had started this game, but I would be the one to end it, and I would play to win. The days following were a blur of anger and disbelief. Ethan's supposed business trip loomed large in my mind, a lie that had shattered my trust. Then one evening, as I sat alone in our once happy home, Ethan called. His voice was cautious, laced with guilt. "Lara, I'm sorry. I should have told you the truth." "The truth? Now you speak of truth?" My voice was icy, sharp. "I wasn't on a business trip. I was with Mia." The admission hit me like a physical blow. "With Mia? You lied to me, Ethan. You lied and betrayed me in the worst way possible." Ethan sighed, a sound of defeat. "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life, but I need you to understand. It's not what you think. Not what I think. You and Mia together while you told me lies? What else is there to think, Ethan?" "Lara, please, let me explain. It's complicated." "Complicated? That's your excuse? Your betrayal is simple and clear. You chose Mia over your wife. There's nothing complicated about that." Ethan was silent for a moment. Then softly he said, "I'm so sorry, Lara. I never meant to hurt you." "Sorry doesn't undo what you've done. It doesn't erase the betrayal, the lies." "I know, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." "Make this right? There's no making this right, Ethan. You've broken everything." I hung up, my heart pounding with rage and sorrow. Ethan's confession was a cold reminder of the deceit that had been my marriage. The next day, I received a call from Mia. Her voice was smug, triumphant. "I heard you talk to Ethan. Finally accepted the truth?" "Accepted the truth? Mia, you and Ethan have destroyed any truth that existed between us." "Oh, poor Lara. Always playing the victim. You know, Ethan always belonged to me. You were just a temporary distraction." Her words were like venom. "Temporary distraction? I was his wife, Mia. What you did, it's unforgivable." Mia laughed, a cold, heartless sound. "Unforgivable? Please, we're in love. That's all that matters." "Love, what you and Ethan have is not love. It's a sick, twisted betrayal. Call it what you want, but Ethan is mine now. You should just move on, Lara." "Move on? Oh, I'll move on, Mia, but not before I make sure you and Ethan pay for what you've done." Mia's laughter echoed in my ears as I ended the call. They thought they had won, that they could just walk away from the wreckage they had caused. But they were wrong. I would have my revenge. Ethan and Mia would rue the day they decided to betray me. The game had just begun, and I was more determined than ever to emerge victorious. The revelation of Ethan and Mia's affair was like a wound that wouldn't heal. But wounds turn into scars, and scars are a testament to survival. I was ready to confront them, to face the truth head-on. I arranged to meet Ethan at a quiet cafe, a neutral ground for the storm that was brewing. He arrived looking weary, the weight of his guilt etched on his face. "Lara, thank you for meeting me," Ethan began, his voice tinged with a hope I didn't share. "Save it here for pleasantries. I want answers." Ethan nodded, resigned. "I owe you that much. Ask anything." "Why? Why her? Why Mia?" Ethan sighed, a deep, troubled sound. "It's complicated. Mia and we've always had this connection. It's hard to explain." "Try me," I challenged, my voice laced with bitterness. "It started when we were kids. It was innocent at first. But as we grew older, it changed. We knew it was wrong, but we couldn't help it. And you thought you could just keep this a secret? Marry me and pretend everything was normal?" Ethan looked down, shame written all over his face. "I thought I could put it behind me. I thought I loved you enough to forget about Mia. I was wrong." "You were wrong about a lot of things," I said coldly. "I know, and I'm sorry, Lara. I never meant to hurt you." "Sorry doesn't cut it, Ethan. You've ruined everything. Our marriage was a lie." Ethan reached out, but I recoiled. "I can't be near you, Ethan. Not now. Not ever. This is over." I stood up, ready to leave, but Ethan's next words stopped me. "What about Mia? Are you going to confront her too?" I turned, a plan forming in my mind. "Mia will get what's coming to her. I'll make sure of it." Ethan's eyes widened, a flicker of fear passing through them. "Lara, what are you planning?" "That's for me to know and you to find out. Just watch your back, Ethan." As I walked away, I felt a sense of empowerment. Ethan and Mia had betrayed me, but I wouldn't be their victim. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. I would dismantle their world, piece by piece, just as they had dismantled mine. My revenge would be meticulous, calculated. They would regret the day they decided to cross me. Ethan and Mia had played their game, but now it was my turn, and I intended to win. The days that followed were a meticulous orchestration of my plan. I gathered evidence, documenting Ethan and Mia's deceit. It was time for their facade to crumble publicly. The opportunity presented itself at a family gathering. It was an annual event, usually a time of celebration. But this year, it was the stage for their unmasking. The room was filled with relatives, unaware of the drama about to unfold. Ethan and Mia were there, playing their roles of the doting brother and sister-in-law. Their pretense sickened me. As dinner progressed, I found my moment. I stood, glass in hand, drawing the room's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," I announced, my voice steady. Eyes turned to me, including Ethan's and Mia's. There was curiosity, expectation. I met Ethan's gaze, saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. "Good. To family," I began. "A bond that should be treasured, not betrayed." Murmurs of agreement filled the room. I continued, "But sadly, not everyone here shares that sentiment." The room quieted, sensing the shift in tone. Ethan's face had drained of color. Mia's eyes were wide, panicked. "I recently discovered a betrayal," I said, my voice rising. "A betrayal by two people in this room." Whispers erupted. I held up my phone, displaying the evidence I had collected: messages, photos, undeniable proof. "Ethan and Mia have been having an affair that shattered a marriage and mocked the sanctity of family." The room erupted in shock and disbelief. Ethan and Mia tried to protest, but their words were drowned out by the uproar. Their mother, standing in stunned silence, finally spoke. "Is this true?" Ethan lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. Mia, defiant even now, said nothing. "You've disgraced this family," their mother said, her voice trembling with anger. "You've disgraced yourselves." The rest of the evening was chaos. Relatives confronted Ethan and Mia, their outrage palpable. I watched, a bittersweet satisfaction settling in me. They were finally seeing Ethan and Mia for who they truly were. As the party disbanded, the weight of what I had done began to sink in. I had exposed them, yes, but at what cost? The family was in turmoil. The once happy gathering turned into a scene of betrayal and shame. But as I left, I knew one thing for certain. Ethan and Mia would no longer bask in the comfort of their lies. They were now outcasts, their deceit laid bare for all to see. My revenge was far from over, but this was a start to reclaiming my life and my dignity. In the aftermath of the public revelation, I watched as Ethan and Mia's world unraveled. Their betrayal was no longer a private agony, but a public spectacle. It was time for legal retribution. I met with a lawyer, a woman known for her ruthlessness in the courtroom. As I explained my situation, her eyes sharpened, a predator sensing the vulnerability of its prey. "We'll go for a full divorce settlement," she said, her voice confident, "and considering the circumstances, a substantial compensation for emotional distress." "And Mia?" I asked, my voice steady. "We'll file a civil lawsuit against her for alienation of affection. It's a strong case, especially with the evidence you've gathered." I nodded, a sense of vindication filling me. Ethan and Mia would pay, not just socially, but financially. The legal proceedings were a whirlwind. Ethan was cooperative, beaten down by guilt and public shame. He agreed to the divorce and the financial settlements without contest. But Mia was another story. In court, she was defiant, refusing to acknowledge her role in the destruction of my marriage, but the evidence was overwhelming and the judgment was swift. Mia was ordered to pay a significant sum for her part in the affair. The courtroom was a cold place, filled with legal jargon and the sterile scent of justice. But as the gavel slammed down, declaring the verdict, a wave of relief washed over me. It was over, at least legally. But the real victory came later. Mia's life unraveled rapidly. Her marriage to Paul ended in a bitter divorce, and her reputation was left in tatters. The financial strain of the lawsuit and divorce settlements left her struggling, a shadow of the arrogant woman she once was. Ethan, too, faced his consequences. The divorce took a toll on him, both emotionally and financially. He reached out to me once, a feeble attempt at reconciliation, but I shut him down. There was no going back, not after everything that had happened. As I rebuilt my life, I realized that my revenge had come at a cost. I had won, but the victory was bittersweet. Ethan and Mia were paying for their betrayal, but the family was fractured, the joy of our gatherings a thing of the past. But amidst the ruins, I found a sense of peace. I had stood up for myself, fought back against those who wronged me. My heart was healing, slowly but surely. Ethan and Mia had taken so much from me, but they couldn't take my spirit. I was moving forward, stronger and more resilient than before. Their betrayal was a part of my past, but it would not define my future. The legal battles were over, and the dust of my shattered life had begun to settle. I found myself in a new apartment, smaller but cozier, filled with a sense of my own identity. It was a fresh start, a place untainted by the memories of Ethan and Mia. One evening, as I sat on my balcony overlooking the city lights, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan's mother, a woman I had always respected and who had shown me nothing but kindness throughout the ordeal. "Lara, can we meet for coffee? I need to talk to you." I agreed, curious and a little apprehensive. We met at a quiet cafe, the same place where I had confronted Ethan months ago. She looked older, the strain of her children's actions etched on her face. "Lara, I wanted to apologize," she began, her voice tinged with sadness, "for Ethan, for Mia, for everything." "There's nothing for you to apologize for," I replied gently. "You weren't the one who betrayed me. I know, but I feel responsible. They're my children after all, and I've lost them both." Her pain was evident, and it mirrored my own. They made their choices, and they're facing the consequences. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I just wish things could have been different." "We all do," I said, feeling a wave of empathy for her. "But we have to play the cards we're dealt." We talked for a while, sharing our grief and our hopes for the future. When we parted, there was a sense of closure, of mutual understanding and respect. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The chapter of Ethan and Mia was closed, but my story was still being written. I realized that my journey of revenge, though justified, had left scars. But those scars were a testament to my strength, my resilience. They were a part of me, but they did not define me. I began to focus on my career, throwing myself into new projects with a renewed vigor. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones. Life was moving on, and so was I. One day I received a letter from Ethan. He wrote of his regret, his sorrow, and his newfound understanding of the pain he had caused. He wished me happiness, a sentiment that once would have fueled my anger, but now it only brought a sense of pity. I didn't respond. Ethan was a part of my past, a chapter that had ended. I was looking forward, not back. I had learned so much about myself, about my strength and my capacity for forgiveness. I had been betrayed, yes, but I had also grown. I was no longer the naive, trusting woman I once was. I was wiser, tougher, and more independent. As I looked out over the city, a sense of peace settled over me. I had faced the worst kind of betrayal and come out stronger. My future was unwritten, a blank canvas waiting for new experiences, new joys, and new challenges. Ethan and Mia had tried to break me, but they had failed. I was still standing, still fighting, still living, and that was the greatest revenge of all.
I'm Kayla, and I'll be turning 55 soon. I have a son named Nick, and I divorced my husband when Nick was in middle school. The reason was my husband's infidelity. Since then, it's just been Nick and I, but now he's married and I live with him and his wife. My daughter-in-law, Nora, is a very beautiful woman. Initially, I had a very good impression of her, but after living together, her true colors showed. She stays at home as a homemaker, but she doesn't do anything that resembles homemaking. She leaves everything to me, and if I ever ask for help, she turns vicious, which is hard to imagine, given her pretty face, and I've often been on the receiving end of her abuse. I wouldn't mind as much if I were just a homemaker, but since I work, there are days when I'm so tired that I wish for help. Nick has seen the way things are between his wife and I. He's asked her to help around the house, but after being verbally abused just like me, he gave up. Seeing all this, I resigned myself to endure without saying anything, but then one day, everything changed. Kayla. As the summer passed and the weather began to cool, I had a day off from work and was at home when I heard Nora's voice calling me. Usually it sounded sarcastic, but that day it seemed frail. Wondering what it was, I stopped my chores and peeked into the couple's bedroom. There I saw Nora, pale-faced and about to fall off the bed. "What's wrong?" I rushed to Nora, touching her hand to check on her. Her hand was chillingly cold, with a pulse that felt slightly fast. She didn't seem to be in a healthy state. Thinking it might be a cold, I touched her forehead, but it wasn't hot. "Are you okay? What's wrong?" I leaned over her listless body and asked. In a faint voice, she barely replied. "My stomach hurts so bad," she said, rubbing her lower abdomen. I thought it might be severe menstrual pain, but when I asked if she had any other symptoms, she mentioned that she had been experiencing diarrhea for a few days, sometimes with blood. I wondered if it could be hemorrhoids, but it seemed unlikely that just hemorrhoids would cause such a severe condition. I decided to take her to urgent care despite the uncertainty. "Urgent care seems excessive. Water will be fine." I told her that we needed to go to the urgent care immediately, and although she looked annoyed, her voice still sounded in pain. I was frustrated with her reluctance, but I forced her into the car and drove to urgent care. I informed Nick, telling him we were at the urgent care clinic, and he said he would come by after work, so we waited for him. The waiting room was full of people, and it looked like it would be a while before Nora's turn came. Nora chose an empty spot on the long bench and just lay down, as if all strength had left her. She must be feeling pretty awful to find it hard to even stay awake. Worried, I kept an eye on Nora while waiting for our turn. How long had we been here? After about 2 or 3 hours, we were finally called into the examination room. It was a struggle, but I managed to help the barely rising Nora to enter with me. That's where the conversation and a series of tests began. We'd arrived at the clinic sometime after 2 p.m., but by the time all the tests were done, I think it was past 5 p.m. Not only was Nora worn out from being tossed around for tests, but I was also beat from just being there with her. It's exhausting, whether it's an urgent care clinic or not. I sat down next to the exhausted Nora and let out a heavy sigh. Then her name was called. I got Nora up again, and we entered the indicated examination room, locking eyes with the doctor inside. The doctor wore a grave look and said we needed more detailed tests, and then Nora had to be admitted immediately at the hospital. I knew this would happen. Afterwards, a nurse led us to the room Nora would be staying in and handed me a paper with a list of things she'd need. "Dr. Miller, I know you will understand, so I'll skip the explanation," the nurse said with a smile outside the room. I scratched my head and looked at the nurse. "I'm a family member of the patient, you know. How about giving me a little rundown?" I said with a forced smile. The nurse sighed heavily. "Dr. Miller, you know how busy we are, right? Please." With that, the nurse headed towards Nora. The reason the nurse spoke to me that way was because I'm an internist here. I've been around since my residency, almost 30 years now. Everyone, nurses and doctors alike, knows me here. But Nora doesn't know I'm a doctor. Nick thought it best to keep it under wraps. He said if people found out I was a doctor, they'd start hounding me for money. Nick, who's also a doctor, says we're not short on money, but he thinks I'm underestimating Nora. I didn't understand what he meant by that at the time, but looking at Nora now, it's clear. She does nothing, even though she's a homemaker and controls all the money Nick earns, doing as she pleases with it. When she's well, she goes shopping and comes back holding shopping bags from fancy brands, which is a bit off-putting to see. I've asked the hospital not to mention that I'm one of their doctors, so Nora won't find out. For now, I've left everything to the nurses and decided to go home to get Nora's things for the hospital stay. As I was grabbing items like clothes, a toothbrush, and a cup, Nick came back. Looking at the clock, it was already 7 p.m. "I'm home," he said. "Oh, didn't you stop by the hospital?" I asked, thinking he wouldn't be home this early if he had. Nick let out a heavy sigh and put his bag down onto the dining table. "I called as I was heading there, but she told me there's nothing I can do. Instead, she told me to go buy sweets, and while I'm at it, pick up her things from the house." He recounted with a wry smile. Nick was exhausted deep down, no doubt about it. "Well, I've just finished getting ready, so I'll bring it over," I said, mirroring Nick's wry smile. With that, we set off again for the hospital, where Nora was admitted. Upon reaching the hospital and entering Nora's room, the sight of her connected to an IV and fast asleep from exhaustion greeted us. She's truly lovely when she's peaceful, I thought, though I could never tell her that. Nick quietly arranged her things without waking Nora, then sat down on a chair. "What could it be?" he muttered under his breath. Watching him, I felt his concern. I tilted my head. "From what I've heard, it's hard to say. Let's just wait for the results of tomorrow's colonoscopy and blood tests." Nick nodded in agreement, and we headed home. The next day, I had work, thinking I'd check on other patients while waiting for Nora's diagnosis. At work, another doctor stopped me to discuss Nora's condition. The diagnosis was Crohn's disease. It's an intractable disease with an unclear cause, yet it's also a condition that many people suffer from. It seemed that Nora's condition had worsened, putting her in a serious state. I was frustrated with myself as a doctor for not realizing it sooner. The presence of a tumor also raised the possibility of colon cancer, and we might need to plan surgery. For now, I had to leave it to the other doctor to explain the situation to Nora. After finishing my shift and changing, I couldn't shake my concern for Nora, so I headed to her room, out of my white coat. Inside, I found Nora's mother, Victoria, talking to her. "You'll be fine. This is a big hospital, and the doctor also said you'll be okay." She seemed to be encouraging Nora. I waited for a pause before entering the room. "Nora, how are you feeling?" Victoria noticed me enter and turned my way, her face swiftly turning into a scowl. I was taken aback and stopped in my tracks. "You, living under the same roof and not noticing my daughter's condition? Nick's a doctor, isn't he? You've both been so useless." She lashed out. Her words struck a nerve, but I found myself speechless. Her face turned beet red with her breaths heavy, seeming on the verge of jumping at me. "Seriously, the least you could do, since you hardly work, is quit your job and devote yourself to Nora." When Victoria noticed my silence, she raised her voice again. "Even if you don't know about my job, nobody has the right to say such things," I thought, feeling a bit offended. But I realized that arguing wouldn't solve anything, especially not in front of a sick person. I simply apologized to Victoria and turned my attention to Nora. Nora seemed to be in a better condition than yesterday. At least her complexion was not poor. However, she looked at me with displeasure. "You seem much better than yesterday," I said with a smile as I approached her, but Nora turned her face away. Seeing your face, Kayla, is making me feel sick. Yeah, nobody likes a meager older lady around. Let's send her home." It was clear they didn't care for me at all. Victoria, trying to soothe Nora, who looked ready to curse me out, made me stop approaching any further. "I'm sorry, then. I'll be leaving now." With those words, I left the room quickly and closed the door behind me. Feeling a bit upset myself, I headed home. Nick arrived soon after, having visited Nora, and it seemed he had learned of her Crohn's disease. He lamented not noticing earlier, sharing the same sentiments as me. "There's nothing we can do about it now. Let's focus on treatment and support her as much as we can," I said to Nick, trying to lift his spirits. He nodded quietly. "Yeah," though he seemed unconvinced. Nora began treatment that day, but for some reason, she didn't agree to surgery, opting for medication instead. The doctor mentioned the tumor was rather large and recommended immediate surgery, but she was adamant about not undergoing the procedure. So they turned to me for persuasion, but someone who seldom heeds my advice is unlikely to start now. Despite my hesitation, I've decided to visit Nora again after work. "Nora, may I come in?" I knocked on the hospital room door and called out to Nora, but there was no answer. After waiting a few seconds, I opened the door slowly and saw Nora watching TV. "How are you feeling?" I sat down in the chair next to her and asked. Nora didn't look at me or say a word, just kept watching the TV. Wondering what to do next, I continued the conversation. "I spoke with your doctor earlier. They say you're refusing surgery? They seem to think it's urgent. Is there a reason you don't want it?"
"It's none of your business."
I expected such a response. I could back down, but as a doctor, and as Nick's mother, I couldn't. "Don't say that, let's just talk about it." Nora sighed heavily and turned off the TV. She didn't look at me, but stared outside instead.
"They said it would cost over $30,000, including the hospital stay. So I just thought it was impossible."
$30,000? I blurted out in surprise.
"It's a waste, right?"
She chuckled through her nose and pulled the blanket over her, but I wondered if she was regretting her words. She certainly seemed to need this. Pondering what to do, an idea struck me. "I'll pay for it. That would be all right, wouldn't it?" At that, her wide eyes opened even wider to look at me.
"You can afford that with your non-paying job?"
"It's fine, I have savings, enough to cover this."
"You're not going to ask for it back later?"
"I won't, so please go ahead with the surgery." I realized I must not have her trust, but this was no time to dwell on that. I just hoped she would accept the offer sincerely. After some thought, she gave a small nod. I smiled, left the hospital room, and informed the attending doctor. I also felt I should tell Nick, so when I got home I did, and his expression turned to one of mild distress. "I'm so sorry, I should be paying, but this really helps." "Do you not have savings?" Understanding he was still young, it was surprising that a doctor of a few years had no savings. When I pressed, his expression grew even more troubled. "All the money went to Nora, even the savings. I really don't know what to do now." Watching him bury his head in his arms on the table, I felt sorry for him. "You should take charge of the finances." "I want to, but she gets angry when I suggest it." According to Nick, she was so modest while they were dating, never fixated on money. But after getting married, she became a different person, quick to anger, throwing fits over trivial matters, and not shying away from spending money. Nick regretted tying the knot, but seemed unable to make the leap to divorce. Maybe he's too kind, thinking that if he just endures, Nora wouldn't have to be unhappy. Then, with Nora's diagnosis of a serious illness, it only made it harder for Nick to consider leaving. Certainly, if he were to propose divorce to a seriously ill Nora now, he'd be met with cold stares. I just told Nick that for now, he should focus on helping Nora get a bit better, and we'd think about the rest later. A few days went by, and on a day when Nick and I both had off, we went to see Nora. Entering the hospital room, Victoria was there too. "Hello." As I walked in with Nick, Victoria's glare hardened, but having grown somewhat immune to that look, I approached Nora without faltering. Nick, apparently not used to it, stopped in his tracks and didn't come closer. "How are you feeling?" I looked at Nora, whose complexion seemed a bit off, maybe not feeling well. "I don't know." Her response to my words might be a small sign of progress. I smiled at Nora's words and pulled out a check from my bag. I had put it in an envelope. "Here, this is what I promised you before." As I handed it to her, Nora's eyes lit up. She grabbed it and immediately checked inside. She looked pleased, as if she'd been waiting for it. From the outside, you'd think she loved money, which left me with a wry smile. "What's this?" Victoria, unaware of the money situation, widened her eyes at the check in Nora's hands, then shot a sharper-than-usual glare my way. "What is this?" "This is for the treatment expenses. Nora was worried about the costs," I replied, wondering if I should have gotten Victoria's permission beforehand, to which she narrowed her eyes and scoffed. "Playing the savior? Don't get ahead of yourself." With that, she snatched the check from Nora's hand and pushed it back at me. Nora whispered a small, "Ah," but quickly looked down when Victoria glared at her. I didn't mean it that way, I just heard that it would be better to have the surgery as soon as possible. There's no need. This child is strong and can make do with just medication. The doctor in charge didn't say that. I wonder why Victoria is so against surgery. It's as if she can't entertain the thought. I look over to Nick, keeping my distance, but he shrugs, seemingly clueless. Nora says she's fine with it. Turning away, Victoria speaks, and I shift my gaze to Nora. Then Nora looks away uncomfortably.
That's right. I don't need any surgery. Just leave me alone.
Despite her agreeing to the surgery earlier, I feel incredibly disappointed. But what if you have cancer? Can you just shut up? I don't want to hear an outsider's opinion. Nick tries to speak up to persuade her, but Victoria cuts him off. We don't plan to listen to you, so could you please go away?
Yeah, just go away.
As I run out of things to say, Victoria pulls my arm, urging me outside. Nora joins in with a laugh. Nick looks puzzled and troubled. Please, wait. Mom has gone through such lengths.
Quiet. I married a doctor and ended up with such a quack. You don't earn much, and you're totally useless.
At that, Nick's expression changes. Clearly, he's angry. It's bad when Nick, who rarely gets angry, is provoked. I grab Nick's shoulder and shake my head to calm him down. Nick looks at me, biting his lip, barely containing his anger. Nora, are you really okay with this? Deciding they won't listen to anything more, I turn to Nora one last time. Nora frowns, but then looks at me with a forced laugh.
I'm fine. Now please take that quack and leave.
At her signal, I take Nick's hand and leave the room. Opening the door, a nurse stands there, her face awkward. That's the situation, so please pass it on to the attending doctor. I don't care anymore. Let her do as she pleases. I tell the frozen nurse, who can only nod slightly. Then I urge Nick to go home, and after that, I head to the director's office to convey something before returning home. Back home, Nick sits at the dining table, not moving, his face full of frustration. Why not just divorce? There's no need to stay after being told off like that. Nora's words had struck a chord with me, too. I'm a doctor, but before that, I'm Nick's mother. I can't stay silent after being disparaged by Nora and Victoria, but still. Yet he seems undecided, his hand on the table gripping tightly, trembling slightly. It's your decision, but I'm done living with that girl. You can have this house, I'll move out. Upon hearing this, Nick, who had been looking down, looks up in surprise. What are you talking about? This is your house. It's fine. I just resigned, too. I'll find a calmer place to work. Indeed, the reason I went to the director's office earlier was to submit my resignation request. I had been waiting for the right moment to leave my current hospital for some time. Having worked there for many years in a general hospital setting, it had become too much for me to keep up. So I thought about continuing my practice in a more settled place, but the opportunity had been elusive, making this the perfect time. Wait a second, you can't just decide that so easily. It must have been sudden for Nick. I smiled at Nick, who looked anxious. It's something I've thought about for a long time. It's okay. It's the right moment. At that, Nick seemed to be at a loss for words, looking down again. Without saying anything more to Nick, I went into my room, checked online for a property in the area that I thought was good, and started preparing. Months later, as I told Nick, I moved away from the place I had lived before, relocating to a much more rural area. I managed to fit in with the community, and am working as a doctor in a small hospital. And now, Nick lives with me. He had divorced Nora, sold his house, and moved down here. From what I heard, Nick spent some time with Nora, trying to convince her to get treatment, but whether it was because of Victoria or not, she never had the surgery, and her condition just worsened. But she still had the energy to berate Nick, and seeing that she never changed, Nick grew tired of it, especially when Victoria started demanding alimony, blaming him for Nora's condition, calling him a quack. Those words led Nick to decide to leave Nora. He offered alimony in exchange for a divorce, and although Victoria was against it, Nora agreed, and they divorced rather swiftly. Later, Nick heard that Nora's condition was indeed a malignant tumor, progressing rapidly due to her youth, advancing to the terminal stage. Victoria begged the doctor to do something, but was told it was hopeless and that she won't live much longer, which she tearfully relayed to Nick over the phone. Nora also reached out to Nick for help, but since she had refused it when it mattered, he did not respond. It may seem heartless, but this was a consequence of their own making. Nick was down for a while, wondering if it was his fault, but as time passed, he found peace and is now working diligently at a new hospital. I sometimes think of Nora, but now there is nothing I can do. I just hope she can spend what time she has left in happiness.
The perfect daughter stands at the podium, her voice steady and clear as she delivers her valedictorian speech. My sister Megan, the golden child, speaking about dreams and potential while I grip the edges of my metal folding chair, fighting the wave of nausea that's been my constant companion for weeks. I'm Aubrey, the family disappointment, and I'm about to ruin my sister's perfect moment. The late May heat presses down on the football field where hundreds of parents and students sit in neat rows. Everything about this graduation ceremony screams control and order, exactly how my father, the college administrator, likes it. He's beaming from his place of honor on stage, watching Megan weave her carefully crafted words about future success and family values. My stomach lurches again. I shouldn't have come, but missing my sister's graduation would have given my father another reason to compare us. Why can't you be more like Megan? The words echo in my head as bile rises in my throat. Are you okay? Tom whispers from beside me. You look pale. I try to nod, but the motion makes the world tilt. The pregnancy test hidden in my desk drawer flashes through my mind, both of them actually. Double positive, double trouble. Megan's voice carries across the field. And so, as we stand on the threshold of our futures, I'm going to throw up, right here, right now, in front of everyone. I stumble to my feet, drawing sharp looks from nearby parents. My mother's eyes find me from her front row seat, her face tightening with familiar disappointment. Aubrey, Tom reaches for my arm, but I'm already moving. I make it 3 steps before my knees buckle. The world spins, voices blur together, and then I'm falling. The last thing I see before everything goes black is my father's face. Not concerned, but angry. Always angry. When I come to, I'm lying on a cot in the nurse's office. The vinyl covering crackles as I shift, and the smell of antiseptic makes my stomach roll again. What were you thinking? My father's voice cuts through the fog. He's standing by the door, arms crossed, jaw clenched. You couldn't even let your sister have one day. Robert, my mother says softly, but there's no real protest in her tone. I'm sorry, I whisper, though I'm not sure what I'm apologizing for. Fainting, being pregnant, or simply existing. The nurse wants to run some tests, my father continues, his words precise and controlled. Care to tell us what she might find? The moment stretches between us like a rubber band about to snap. In my head, I see the next few minutes play out. The revelation, the shock, the inevitable explosion of rage and disappointment. My father's carefully constructed image of our perfect family crumbling because his youngest daughter got knocked up at 19. I'm pregnant, I say, and the words hang in the air like smoke. My mother makes a small sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a sob. My father's face goes completely still, the way it does right before he explodes. Who knows? He demands. Just Tom. And Ethan, the father, I swallow hard. He doesn't want anything to do with it. Of course he doesn't, my father snaps. This ends now. We'll make arrangements. No. The word comes out stronger than I expected. This isn't a discussion, Aubrey. You will not destroy everything we've built, everything your sister has worked for. I sit up slowly, the room swaying slightly. I'm keeping it. The hell you are. He steps closer, looming over me. You're barely more than a child yourself. You have no job, no degree, no future. You will do as I say. Looking into his eyes, I see something I've never noticed before. Fear. Not for me, but for himself. For his reputation, his control, his perfect family facade. No, I say again. And in that moment, something shifts inside me. A seed of resistance taking root, growing stronger with each beat of my heart. I won't. His face darkens, and I know what's coming next will change everything. But for the first time in my life, I'm ready for the storm. The drive home feels like a funeral procession. My father's Mercedes leads the way, my mother silent beside him. I'm in the back of Tom's beaten-up Honda, watching the familiar streets blur past, each turn bringing us closer to the confrontation I know is coming. I can turn around, Tom says quietly. We could just drive. Keep going until we hit the coast. The offer tempts me more than I want to admit, but running won't solve anything. I learned that lesson watching my Aunt Clara disappear from our lives years ago, leaving nothing but whispered accusations and my father's rage in her wake. Our house looms ahead, all perfect angles and manicured lawns, a prison disguised as a home. Tom pulls up to the curb, and I catch my sister's car already parked in the driveway. Of course, Megan would be here. She's probably already planning damage control. You don't have to do this alone, Tom says. Yes, I do. I squeeze his hand once before stepping out into the evening air. Inside, voices drift from my father's study. I pause in the hallway, my hand resting unconsciously on my still flat stomach. She's always been difficult, my mother's voice, strained and tired. But this ends tonight. My father's tone leaves no room for argument. I won't have her destroy everything we've built. Maybe if we just... Megan starts. Enough! A sharp crack, his hand hitting his desk. Your sister has made her choice. Now she'll face the consequences. I step into the doorway, forcing myself to stand straight despite the nausea still lurking at the edges of my consciousness. Don't I get a say in those consequences? 3 heads snap toward me. My father behind his massive desk, my mother perched on the leather sofa, and Megan standing by the window, a perfect family portrait about to shatter. You lost that right when you decided to throw away your future, my father says. Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation, to your sister's career prospects? My career prospects? Megan's voice cracks slightly. Dad, that's not... Of course it is, he cuts her off. Everything we've worked for, everything we've sacrificed to maintain our standing in this community. And you? He turns back to me. You just had to play the rebel. Couldn't stand seeing your sister succeed, could you? The accusation hits harder than I expect. This has nothing to do with Megan. Everything in this family has to do with everyone in this family, he snaps. Your mother and I have already made the arrangements. Dr. Phillips owes me a favor. This can all be handled quietly, and we can put this unfortunate incident behind us. No. The word comes out steady, surprising even me. This isn't a discussion, Aubrey. You're right, I say. It's not, because this isn't your choice to make. My mother finally speaks, her voice soft but sharp. You're 19, living under our roof, dependent on our support. What exactly do you think your options are? I'll leave. The words taste like freedom and terror mixed together. And go where? My father laughs, but there's no humor in it. To that boy's house? The one who couldn't even face us today? Robert, my mother warns, but he's building steam now. Or maybe to your Aunt Clara? Following in her footsteps of poor decisions and burned bridges? Something in his tone makes me pause. There's more there. Something raw and personal in the way he spits out Aunt Clara's name. I file it away for later examination. I'll figure it out, I say. But I'm keeping this baby. Then you'll do it without our support. He stands, towering over his desk. No money, no car, no college fund, nothing. Dad, please. Megan steps forward, but he silences her with a look. You have until morning to pack your things, he continues. After that, you're no longer welcome in this house. My mother makes a small sound, quickly stifled. Megan's face has gone pale, her perfect composure cracking around the edges. And in that moment, I see them all clearly. Puppets dancing to my father's tune, too afraid or too broken to cut their strings. Fine, I say, and turn to leave. But at the doorway, I stop. You know what's funny? You're so worried about your reputation, about what people will think. But at least I'm honest about my mistakes. What about yours? I don't wait for his response. As I climb the stairs to my room, I hear the first cracks forming in their perfect facade. My mother's muffled sob, Megan's raised voice, my father's sharp commands for silence. Tomorrow, I'll be gone. But I'm starting to realize that leaving might just be the beginning of something much bigger than a teenage pregnancy scandal. Dr. Phillips's office smells like artificial lavender and judgment. The pamphlets on the coffee table mock me with their cheerful fonts and sanitized language about options and choices. My mother sits 3 chairs away, her spine rigid, checking her watch every 30 seconds as if she could speed time through sheer will. Aubrey Thompson? The nurse's voice carries across the waiting room. I stand, my legs shaking. My mother rises too, but I hold up my hand. I'm going alone. Don't be difficult, she whispers, but I'm already following the nurse down the sterile hallway. Dr. Phillips looks exactly like someone my father would know. Expensive watch, practiced smile, the kind of confidence that comes from never having your authority questioned. He gestures to the examination chair while reviewing my chart. So we're looking at approximately 8 weeks, he says, not really a question. Robert explained the situation. We can take care of this quickly and discreetly. I want to know about the risks. He looks up, surprised. The procedure is very safe. We can have you back home by... All the risks, I interrupt. Long-term complications, future fertility, everything. Something flickers across his face. Annoyance, maybe respect. He sets down the chart. There's always a small chance of complications. In rare cases, scarring can affect future fertility, but given your situation... What situation? My father's reputation? The doctor's carefully neutral expression cracks slightly. Your father is concerned about your future. Sometimes we need to make difficult choices to protect... To protect what? My voice rises. The family name? His position at the college? Tell me, Dr. Phillips, how many other girls has my father sent to you for discreet solutions? His silence tells me everything. I'm not having the procedure, I say, standing. And I think maybe the medical board would be interested in knowing about your arrangement with my father. Miss Thompson. His tone hardens. Think carefully about what you're doing. Your father has influenced a lot of careers in this town, including mine. But he's also ended them. The threat hangs between us, and suddenly I understand exactly how my father maintains his perfect world. How many lives has he shaped or destroyed with his influence? How many secrets are buried under his carefully maintained reputation? I leave without another word, ignoring my mother's questions as I walk straight out of the clinic. The summer air hits me like a wall, and I gulp it down, fighting nausea that has nothing to do with pregnancy. My phone buzzes. A text from Megan. Where are you? Dad's furious. Another buzz. Aunt Clara called the house. Dad lost it. Something about James? My fingers freeze over the screen. James. A name I've never heard before, but it made my father lose control? I save the message just as Tom's car pulls up. You okay? He asks as I slide into the passenger seat. Drive to Aunt Clara's. Your parents won't look for me there. They haven't spoken to her in years. I punch her address into his GPS, the one my mother thought I didn't know about, carefully preserved in an old address book hidden in her desk. What happened in there? I stare out the window, watching the familiar streets of our town transform into unknown territory. I think I just discovered that Dr. Phillips isn't the only one keeping my father's secrets. Aubrey. Tom's voice is careful. Are you sure you want to pull this thread? Some secrets stay buried for a reason. Like James? The name feels significant on my tongue, though I don't know why. Who's James? I don't know, but my father's reaction to his name tells me he's important. I rest my hand on my stomach, feeling a new kind of strength growing inside me, and Aunt Clara knows why. We turn onto a quiet street lined with modest houses, nothing like my father's carefully maintained mansion. Tom pulls up to a small blue house with wild roses climbing the porch. Whatever you find out, he says, it's going to change things. Are you ready for that? I look at the house, thinking about secrets and lies, about power and control, about the way my father's perfectly constructed world is built on other people's silence. Yes, I say, opening the car door. I'm ready to tear it all down. The porch steps creak under my feet as I approach the door, each step taking me further from the life I knew and closer to whatever truth waits behind Aunt Clara's door. I raise my hand to knock, and in that moment, I feel something shift inside me. Not just the baby, but something deeper. Something that tastes like justice. Aunt Clara's kitchen table holds more truth than my father's entire house. The morning light streams through unwashed windows, illuminating a stack of old photographs and newspaper clippings spread before me. My hands shake as I pick up a yellowed hospital record. James Thompson, I read aloud. Born with spina bifida, given up for adoption. The date makes my stomach clench. Exactly 25 years ago. Your father made that decision alone, Aunt Clara says, pouring more coffee into my untouched cup. Linda was still sedated when he signed the papers. But she never fought it? By the time she found out, Robert had convinced everyone it was for the best. A clean break, he called it. Clara's mouth twists. Nothing clean about abandoning your child. My phone buzzes again. Another message from Megan. I've been ignoring them all morning, but this one catches my eye. Dad's calling an emergency family meeting. Says he knows where you are. Please come home. He can't force me back, I say, more to myself than Clara. No, but he can make life very difficult. She slides a business card across the table. James Harrison, that's the name he goes by now. He's giving a speech at the medical conference next month. Your father's conference. The irony hits like a punch to the gut. My perfect, controlling father who threw away his firstborn son will be sitting in the audience while that same son delivers the keynote address on pediatric surgery. Does James know about them? No. Clara's eyes hold something I can't quite read. But maybe he should. A knock at the door makes us both jump. Tom appears in the kitchen doorway, his face tight with worry. Aubrey, you need to see this. He holds out his phone, showing me a social media post from Megan. It's a carefully worded announcement about her new job at the college, working directly under our father. The comments are full of congratulations, praising the Thompson family legacy. She's choosing his side, I whisper. She's choosing survival, Clara corrects. Just like I did once. Just like your mother still does. Another message pops up, this one from an unknown number. My heart stops when I open it. It's a photo of me entering the abortion clinic yesterday, clearly taken without my knowledge. The caption reads, "What would the board think about Dr. Phillips's special arrangements?" He's threatening me, I say, showing them the message. Tom's jaw tightens. We should go to the police. With what? My father owns half this town. The realization hits me hard. That's why you left, isn't it, Clara? You knew something. She doesn't answer immediately, instead walking to a locked drawer in her desk. The key shakes slightly in her hand as she removes a thick manila envelope. I kept records, she says finally. Of everything. Every girl your father sent to Phillips, every career he destroyed, every favor called in, including what really happened with James. Why didn't you use them? Because exposure would hurt more than just Robert. All those girls, those families, they've built new lives. Some secrets protect the innocent as much as the guilty. She places the envelope in front of me. But maybe it's time for the right truth to come out. I stare at the envelope, feeling the weight of lives and lies pressing down on me. Through the window, I can see my father's Mercedes pulling up to the curb. He's here, Tom says quietly. Good. I stand, one hand on my stomach, the other gripping the envelope. Let him come. Aubrey, Clara's voice stops me. Remember, revenge and justice aren't always the same thing. I look at the envelope, then at the photo of James speaking at a medical conference. Successful, whole, everything my father tried to throw away. In that moment, I realize what I have to do. No, I agree. Sometimes justice is better. The doorbell rings, its cheerful chime at odds with the tension filling the room. I take a deep breath, feeling my child move within me. Another life my father wanted to erase. But this time, the choice isn't his to make. I head for the door, the envelope secure in my hands, ready to face whatever comes next. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone's perfect world, it's forcing them to face the truth they've spent a lifetime burying. The medical conference program feels heavy in my hands. James Harrison's photo stares back at me. My father's abandoned son, now a celebrated pediatric surgeon. 3 weeks of planning have led to this moment, watching the conference center fill with doctors, administrators, and my father's carefully cultivated network of influence. "He's arriving in 10 minutes, Tom says, checking his phone. Security confirmed it. I adjust my visitor's badge, conscious of my growing belly beneath the loose blazer. 4 months pregnant, and already my body betrays secrets I'm not ready to share. "Aubrey?" Megan's voice makes me freeze. She stands at the entrance to the conference hall, wearing the same expression she used when covering for my teenage rebellions. "Dad knows you're here." "Good." I hold up the manila envelope from Clara. "He should be here for this." "You don't understand. Ethan's here too." The name hits like ice water. "What?" "Dad hired him. He's working security." She steps closer, lowering her voice. "He knows things, Aubrey, about the baby." My hand instinctively moves to my stomach. Ethan abandoned me the moment I told him about the pregnancy, but of course my father would find a way to weaponize him. "Dr. Harrison is entering the building," crackles over the security radio at a nearby guard's belt. Time slows. Through the glass doors, I see James for the first time in person. He walks with a slight limp, the only visible sign of the condition my father deemed unworthy of the Thompson name. Behind him, I spot Ethan in a security uniform, speaking into his radio. "Whatever you're planning," Megan whispers, "it's not too late to stop." Actually, it is. I pull out my phone, sending the pre-written email to every board member and local news outlet. Because I just sent proof of Dad's arrangement with Dr. Phillips. And in about 30 seconds, James is going to learn who really signed his adoption papers. Megan's face drains of color. "You'll destroy everything." "No. Dad did that 25 years ago when he threw away his son." The conference hall doors open. James enters, surrounded by admiring colleagues. My father appears from another doorway, his practiced smile faltering when he sees me. "Security," he snaps, but Ethan hesitates, looking between us. "Sir?" Ethan starts. "Maybe we should... now." I step forward, envelope in hand. "Hello, James?" Or should I say, brother? The room goes silent. James turns, confusion crossing his face. My father moves with surprising speed, but Tom steps between us. "Miss Thompson," a security guard approaches. "You need to leave." "Not before he sees these." I open the envelope, pulling out the adoption papers with my father's signature. 25 years ago, Robert Thompson signed away his firstborn son because he was born with spina bifida, a son who grew up to become one of the country's leading pediatric surgeons. James takes the papers with trembling hands. My father's face contorts with a rage I've never seen before. "You ungrateful!" He starts toward me, but Megan suddenly moves to my side. "It's true," she says, her voice carrying across the stunned audience. "I found the papers in Mom's desk years ago." Phones are out now, recording everything. James stares at the documents, then at our father, his professional composure cracking. "Robert Thompson is your biological father," I continue, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "He abandoned you without your mother's consent, just like he tried to force me to abort my baby to protect his precious reputation." "You're lying," James whispers, but his eyes say he knows it's true. My phone buzzes. News alerts about Dr. Phillips's illegal arrangements with the college administrator. My father's carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. "I can explain," my father starts, but James cuts him off. "Explain what? How you threw away a child because he wasn't perfect? How you're still doing it?" Ethan steps forward, removing his security earpiece. "Sir, I won't help you hurt her again." The room erupts in whispers. My father's network watching his control slip away. But as I look at James's devastated face, at Megan's tears, at the pain rippling through our broken family, I realize revenge tastes different than I imagined. I didn't do this for revenge, I say, loud enough for everyone to hear. I did it because some truths need to be told. Some lies need to end. My father lunges for the papers in James's hands, but it's too late. The truth, like the child growing inside me, has a life of its own now, and neither of us can be silenced anymore. The college board meeting room feels like a tomb. My father sits at the head of the table, his lawyer whispering in his ear while board members shuffle papers and avoid eye contact. The local news vans outside cast long shadows through the windows. I'm not supposed to be here, but Megan's employee badge got me through security. My sister, now suspended from her position pending investigation, stands in the corner, her perfect posture finally cracking under the weight of everything we've lost. The board calls Dr. James Harrison, the chairman announces. James enters, walking past me without a glance. Since the conference, he's refused to speak to any of us. I don't blame him. Finding out your biological father abandoned you is one thing. Learning your sister used that truth as a weapon is another. Dr. Harrison, my father's lawyer begins, regarding the allegations made about your adoption. They're not allegations. James's voice cuts through the formal atmosphere. I've confirmed everything through hospital records. Robert Thompson is my biological father, and he abandoned me without my mother's consent. My father doesn't flinch, but his knuckles whiten against the polished table. Miss Thompson, the chairman turns to me. Your evidence regarding Dr. Phillips's arrangements, we need to discuss. The boardroom door bursts open. My mother storms in, clutching a familiar manila envelope. My stomach drops. Not the copy I gave James, but the original from Aunt Clara's desk. Linda, my father warns, but she's already speaking. These records, she says, her voice trembling, they're not complete. Clara didn't just keep evidence about Robert's arrangements. She kept everything. The room goes silent. My mother pulls out a document I've never seen before, including proof that she's James's real mother. The world tilts. James stands so quickly his chair crashes backward. What? Clara Thompson is your biological mother, my mother continues. Robert forced her to give you up, threatened to expose her relationship with a married doctor. He used you to control her, just like he's tried to control all of us. My father's mask finally cracks. You had no right. I had every right! My mother's voice rises. 25 years of secrets, of watching you destroy lives to maintain your precious reputation. And now our daughters. That's enough. My father stands. This meeting is over. No, James says quietly. It's not. Because I'm pressing charges. Against all of you. The word hits like a physical blow. James, I never meant... To what? Use me for revenge? Destroy my life to punish him? He gestures at our father. You're all the same. Playing games with people's lives. Thinking you get to decide what truth deserves to be told. Megan steps forward. We were trying to help. Help? James laughs bitterly. I had a life, a career, parents who chose me. Now what do I have? A biological father who threw me away, an aunt who's actually my mother, and a sister who used my trauma for her own vendetta. The board members whisper among themselves. My father's lawyer scribbles furiously, and I stand there, feeling my carefully constructed plan crumbling around me. The district attorney's office will be in touch, James says, turning to leave. With all of you. As he walks out, I catch a glimpse of Aunt Clara in the hallway, her face pale and drawn. Our eyes meet briefly before she turns away, following her son into the shadows of truths I never should have unearthed. Well, my father says into the silence, his voice steady again. It seems my daughter's quest for justice has backfired rather spectacularly. He's right. In trying to expose his secrets, I've destroyed more than just his reputation. I've shattered James's life, betrayed Aunt Clara's trust, cost Megan her career, and now face potential legal consequences that could affect my unborn child's future. The baby kicks, as if sensing my despair. Tom's words echo in my head. Sometimes revenge hurts the avenger more than the target. I leave the boardroom without another word, walking past the news vans and reporters, past the familiar buildings where my father once reigned supreme. The truth is out now, but it's not the cleansing fire I imagined. Instead, it's a poison that's touched everyone I meant to protect. In the parking lot, I spot James helping Aunt Clara into his car. They drive away without looking back, leaving me alone with the realization that in my quest for justice, I've become exactly what I hated. Someone who sacrifices others for their own agenda. The worst part isn't the potential charges or the family I've destroyed. It's knowing that somewhere in this wreckage, I lost sight of who I wanted to be. The courthouse steps are crowded with reporters when my father emerges from his hearing. His lawyer shields him from cameras while flashbulbs capture his fallen empire. The great Robert Thompson, facing criminal charges for decades of manipulation and corruption. I watch from across the street, one hand on my swollen belly, the other clutching James's latest press statement. He's become the face of medical ethics reform, turning his pain into purpose, unlike me. Ready? Tom asks beside me. Before I can answer, Aunt Clara's car pulls up. She steps out, looking older than her 42 years, and walks straight toward my father. The reporters surge forward, sensing blood in the water. Robert! Her voice carries across the chaos. We need to talk. My father tries to push past, but she grabs his arm. About Mother's Trust Fund. He freezes. Even from here, I see the color drain from his face. Not here, he hisses. Yes, here. She turns to the cameras. Should I tell them how you really paid for James's adoption? About the money you stole? I move without thinking, crossing the street. Tom calls after me, but I'm already caught in the gravity of this moment. What trust fund? I ask, stepping into the circle of cameras. My father's mask cracks. Aubrey, leave. Your grandmother left everything to Clara. My mother's voice comes from behind me. She emerges from the courthouse looking straight at her husband. But Robert convinced the lawyers she was unstable after her affair, had everything transferred to him instead. You used my inheritance to pay for my own adoption? Clara's laugh is bitter. To buy my silence? The reporter's questions become a roar. My father's lawyer tries to intervene, but it's too late. I protected this family! My father shouts suddenly. Everything I did was to maintain order, to preserve our name. By destroying everyone who didn't fit your perfect image, I step closer. James, Clara, me? You ungrateful! He lunges forward, but someone catches his arm. James. That's enough, Father. The word drips with contempt. The board of directors just voted. The medical center is launching a full investigation into every adoption you facilitated through Dr. Phillips. My father's composure shatters completely. You can't... Actually, I can. As the new head of ethics oversight. James turns to Clara, to his mother. With full support from the district attorney's office. The cameras capture everything. My father's defeat, Clara's tears, James's quiet strength. But it's my mother who delivers the final blow. I've filed for divorce, she announces, and I'm testifying about everything. My father lunges again, this time at my mother. I step between them instinctively, protecting her the way she never protected me. He pulls back at the last second, his hand frozen in midair, finally seeing what he's become. You're just like him, he spits at me. Using people's secrets as weapons. Destroying lives for revenge. The words hit home, but not in the way he expects. Because he's right, I did become like him, and that's why this has to end differently. No, I say quietly. I'm choosing to be better. That's why I'm dropping the charges against you. The reporters fall silent. James and Clara turn to stare at me. What? My father whispers. I'm having a daughter, I tell him. And I won't teach her that revenge heals anything. The truth is out now. What happens next isn't about destroying you. It's about rebuilding everything you broke. I turn to James and Clara, starting with our real family. My father stands alone on the courthouse steps, surrounded by cameras, but finally stripped of his power to control the narrative. The truth has done what revenge never could. Set us all free. Let's go home, I say to no one in particular, and everyone who matters follows. James, Clara, my mother, Megan, Tom. We leave my father to face the consequences of his own choices, not our vengeance. As we walk away, my daughter kicks, and I understand finally what Clara meant about some secrets protecting the innocent. The biggest secret was one I kept from myself. That healing comes not from revenge, but from the courage to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. Clara's garden blooms with late summer roses as I watch James teach my daughter to walk. Her tiny hands grip his fingers while she toddles across the uneven ground, his patience matching her determination. The sight makes my chest ache with something between joy and regret. She has your stubbornness, Megan says, settling beside me on the porch steps. She's different now, softer around the edges, but stronger at her core. The job she found at a women's shelter suits her better than our father's carefully planned career ever did. And your grace, I reply, watching my daughter's careful steps. The screen door creaks behind us. My mother emerges with lemonade, her wedding ring notably absent. The divorce papers arrived yesterday, along with news of my father's plea deal. House arrest instead of prison, his empire reduced to a monitored existence in the same mansion he once ruled. Ethan called again, my mother says quietly. I know. I touch my phone through my pocket, feeling the weight of his unread messages. He wants to meet his daughter, claims he's changed. Maybe he has, but some bridges stay burned. James scoops up my giggling daughter, his slight limp more pronounced after a long day. Someone's ready for her nap, he calls, heading toward us. I'll take her, Clara offers, appearing from her garden. She meets James's eyes, mother and son still navigating their complicated truth. He hands over my daughter with a small smile, their shared features obvious now that we know to look for them. The ethics board approved the new oversight committee, James tells me as Clara disappears inside. We're implementing screening procedures for all adoption cases. No more secret arrangements. And Dr. Phillips? Lost his license. He's cooperating with the investigation. Tom's truck pulls into the driveway, his son Noah waving from the passenger seat. They've become regular fixtures here, helping Clara with house repairs, joining our makeshift Sunday dinners, building something new from the ashes of what burned. Dad asked about you, Megan says suddenly. He wanted to know if you'd bring the baby to see him. The old anger flares, but it's duller now, more like an old scar than an open wound. What did you tell him? That it's not my decision to make. She picks at a loose thread on her sleeve. He's different now, smaller. Sometimes smaller is better, my mother observes. Means there's room to grow. Inside, I hear my daughter's laughter mixing with Clara's soft singing. The sound draws me up, pulling me toward the door, but I pause at the threshold. I got another letter from the support group, I tell them. 3 more families have come forward about forced adoptions. They're asking for help navigating reunions. Are you going to help them? James asks. I think about revenge and justice, about how thin the line between them can be, about my daughter, who will grow up knowing all her family's truths, the beautiful and the ugly ones. Yes, I decide, but not for revenge, for healing. The afternoon light catches the roses, making them glow like tiny flames. Tom and Noah join us on the porch, fitting seamlessly into our patchwork family. My mother pours more lemonade, her hands steady now that she's free. Megan leans against the railing, finally comfortable in her own skin. James watches Clara through the window, their shared pain slowly transforming into understanding. And I stand in the doorway between past and future, knowing that some secrets need to stay buried, while others need the light to heal. My father's perfect world had to burn so something real could grow in its place. My daughter's cry draws me inside, not urgent, but demanding. As I lift her from Clara's arms, she grabs my necklace, the one containing a small photo of all of us at her christening. Her family. Not perfect, not unbroken, but real. Tell me again, she'll ask someday, about how our family found each other. And I'll tell her about revenge that turned to redemption, about secrets that became strength, about how sometimes you have to tear everything down to build something true. But mostly, I'll tell her about love, the kind that survives fire and grows back stronger in broken places. Because that's the secret I finally learned. Revenge burns everything, but truth plants gardens.